guys, welcome back to The Bright Side. Macy here, the Bright Side Girl, and today I'm going to be sharing some of my favorite mermaid standalones. So I have a huge pile of mermaid books to share with you guys. All of these are standalones, which will be perfect for Mermaid Marathon, which is coming up June 26th through July 9th, my mermaid pirate oceany themed readathon. I will link the announcement video up in the cards and the information about it down below in the description. I love reading standalone books for readathons because then you don't have to commit to a series. You don't feel like you need to binge a series during a readathon. Usually they're shorter than some of our series books as well. So I have a big stack for you today. Most of them are my favorites. A few I just kind of keep because they're mermaid related and I enjoyed them. The vibes are there. I own almost all of them. I think I'm only missing a couple, but I'm so excited to share this giant stack with you and give you some more recommendations for the readathon. Okay, first up, I have to mention The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen, the origin story of almost all of these books. Even if they're not retellings, I feel like a lot of them still get inspiration from this book. This original fairy tale that inspired the Little Mermaid movie from Disney is very different. It's a lot darker than the Disney movie or than the tales that you're used to, but it's still very good. The ending's kind of strange. It's kind of wild. It's a very, very short book to get in. I've read it a few times now. I've done it via audio. I've done it physically, and it's a good one to get in if you haven't already. Then we have Mermaid by Carolyn Turgeon. I would say this is the closest to the original fairy tale, a true actual retelling. A lot of books are considered Little Mermaid retellings, but they don't actually follow the Little Mermaid story at all. They just have a mermaid in them. So I don't really count that as a retelling. But this one follows it pretty closely and just kind of expands and makes it larger. It talks a lot about female friendship, which is really great. It's less about the romance of Eric and the Little Mermaid than it is about friendship and just the overall fairy tale. I really enjoy Carolyn Turgeon's writing style. It's so beautiful. I really like her fairy tale retellings. So this is one that I highly recommend. Next we have Wrecked by Anna Davies. Now I will say this is probably one of my least favorite standalone mermaid books, but for some reason with mermaid books I tend to want to reread them even if I didn't love them, just because I love the vibes of the ocean and the girls being mermaids and turning human or not turning human or whatever the deal is. So in this one we're set on an island coastal town. Our main character was in a shipwreck with a bunch of her friends and she survived and somehow made it to shore and she doesn't really know how. So I'll leave you with that information. This has a nice little love story in it. This one is YA. I think most of the books are YA, but I'll let you know if they're not. And this has a great villain in it. I will say that. I really liked the villain part, so I feel like I'm due for a reread of this one sometime soon because I may have liked it more than I think I did. Then we have Between the Sea and Sky by Jacqueline de L'Amour. So this one has a very whimsical fairy tale-esque vibe about it as well. This is also a very short book. This one blends mermaids and sirens. We get some other magical creatures in here as well. There's also a little bit of a love story in here. This is also young adult. If you like a true whimsical fairy tale-esque vibe, this is a really, really good one. And I believe this one is also set on a coastal town. We have The Deep from River Solomon. So this is an adult mermaid story. This is a very short little novella story. I was very worried to read this last year for the first time. This is about pregnant African slaves being thrown overboard, and that's kind of how the mermaids come to be. It has a darker origin story, which was very neat to read about, but I was worried that it was going to be too dark and depressing. Sometimes mermaid books can go very, very depressing and dark, and I don't mind a little bit of darkness, but I still like it to be just kind of a fun read overall. So while this did cover some important topics and it was a little bit darker, the fantasy elements were really strong, the world building was good, and it was just kind of a magical, really unique novella. Next we have The Surface Break by Louisa O'Neill. This is another true retelling of The Little Mermaid. I so enjoyed this one more than I thought I would. Again, this is one I thought was going to get too dark. We've got some feminist fighting back topics in here, but it was done so well. The fantasy world was really good. It followed the original story pretty good, and overall I had just a really great time with it. So definitely got some darker topics in this one. I don't know if this is adult or young adult. I think it's young adult though, but I really, really enjoyed it. I have a copy ordered and coming on the way, so I'm excited to get it. Then we have Marrow by Anata Braxton Smith. This one's very, very whimsical and lyrical, so it's not going to be for everybody. I believe we have some Irish folklore in here, some kind of folklore. You're following a young girl and lives with her grandmother, and then they discover a merman, but the whole thing is told in this very whimsical, dramatic, lyrical way. So again, not going to be for everyone, but I did enjoy it, and if you just love mermaid siren books, then I would recommend. We have To Kill a Kingdom from Alexandra Christo. This is one I very much need to reread reread because this one was all the rage like 4 or 5 years ago, and everybody was talking about it and everybody loved it. It was described as like a dark Little Mermaid retelling where basically the siren hunts the prince and the prince hunts the siren. I remember enjoying it, but I remember not liking it as much as everyone else, and I think it's just because I've read so many good mermaid books that this one did not make it to like the top, but a lot of people haven't read mermaid books, so this one made it to the top of their list, if that makes sense. So I need to reread it to kind of confirm that status because I remember enjoying it because I like mermaid books in general. It just wasn't like a 5-star for me like it was for a lot of other people. So if you did really like this one, definitely check out some of these other ones. I don't really consider this one dark like it was described. This is still YA. It's got a little bit more of an intenseness to it because the sirens are hunting the humans and the prince is hunting the sirens and things like that, and so that was kind of fun. But I didn't consider it like a super dark read. So it's on here. For me, it was like a 3.5 star, but I'm gonna reread it sometime soon. Then we have Ripple by Mandy Hubbard. Mostly just like a siren mermaid romance set in a small town. It looks very simple, very old school YA, but I remember really enjoying this one. Our main character is like drawn to the water. She wants to go swimming at nighttime, and then she winds up falling in love and discovering things. This one was about a 4-star for me. All right, we got Songs from the Deep by Kelly Powell. So this one has less to do with the mermaids than the other ones I've mentioned. They're in here, but they're not the main plot. This is more of like a murder mystery, but it's set on a coastal town. It's got those darker vibes if you like something just almost spooky, but not really, kind of creepy and eerie. This is such a good one. The audiobook for this one is really good. So in this one, this coastal town knows that they're sirens and they kind of keep to themselves, and they are told to like stay away from them, and they find a young boy that's been murdered. They think it was the sirens, and our main character doesn't think it was the sirens, so she kind of like investigates the murder with a friend. So it's more about the murder and the investigation in the coastal town, but there's a little bit of mermaidy talk in here, and the vibes are really good as well. Then we have The Siren by Kira Cass. I love Kira Cass's The Selection series. Is one of my favorites ever. It's one of the reasons that I got on BookTube and got back into reading. I love her writing. It's just really fun. So I was very excited to find out she had like a mermaid siren tale. So I'm torn about this one. It sits at like a 3.5 for me because I really love her writing. I loved the way that the mermaids were told in here. They're like sisters and they travel to different towns and they're supposed to murder people, but the one girl doesn't want to, and they have to kind of revamp their lives everywhere they move, and then she falls in love. The romance is really good in here. It's like a sweet little young adult love story. But the main thing I didn't like is that the sea/ocean is a character and speaks to the mermaids and is very creepy and motherly and protective and overbearing and very strange, and it just didn't work too well for me, but I still recommend this one overall. It's just a little bit odd, so know that going in. Then we have The Mermaid's Sister, which again I don't own a copy of, but I ordered one and it's on the way because I love this one so much. So we have two sisters living with their aunt. They live in a cottage on the mountaintop, and one of the sisters spends her days hunting herbs to make potions and tinctures for her aunt, and her favorite is when her aunt tells stories of how they were found. Her aunt weaves this magical tale that she was brought by a stork. Her sister was found inside of a seashell, and then their friend that comes to visit a lot was found beneath an apple tree. So one day she discovers her sister has gotten scales on her skin, and she believes that she will be a mermaid and she must be taken to the sea or she will die. So she sets off on a journey to do this, and along the way just a bunch of things happen. I thought this was so lovely and so magical. I always want to reread this book. The audio in particular was so good, and it was just like really sweet and lovely and fairy tale-esque, and highly recommend it. Taking a darker turn, we have Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. This is an adult kind of mystery, almost thriller, but a little bit on the slower side. This is technically a novel that was developed on a short story that Mira Grant wrote that's now considered the prequel to this. I think she wrote it for a magazine and it just really took off, so she wrote this full-length novel, and I love this so much. I physically read this during Bookathon, which is Books and Lala's like Halloween readathon that she used to do years ago, and I have a whole vlog of me like reading it and freaking out because it was like one of the first kind of horror-esque books that I had read. I wouldn't say that it's like scary, but I'm a little bit of a baby, but it was definitely like thrilling, and you're like, you don't know what's happening. So in this one we have a crew that sets out to go to the Mariana Trench trench to film a mockumentary about an ancient like sea legend, and it was lost at sea and the ship never returned, and none of the people on board returned either. So in this one, a lot of people think it's a tragedy, some people think it's a hoax. So we're 7 years later, the company that originally wanted to film this gathers a different team to go and like investigate this area and what happened. So they gathered this group of different types of people. So they have like hunters, they have really intense like film recorders, they have a woman that can like communicate with dolphins and has trained dolphins, and a whole like crew to go and like figure out what happened and what's going on in this area. It is so good. This is very different. It's very dark. The mermaid aspect is more of like a monster thing than it is like these beautiful girls that turn human. So if you're looking for a darker, slightly spooky adult novel, this is for you, but I was shocked how much I enjoyed it, and I still think about it a lot. I always want to reread it. It's really good. The ending leaves it a little bit open-ended, but I highly recommend this. It's one of my favorites. Next, we have Inland by Kat Rosenfield. So I picked this one up because the opening is, there was a shadow in the water, and when it moved beneath our boat, the sea opened its yawning blue mouth and swallowed my mother whole. And that was all that I really knew about this book. The vibes in this book are so good because we're set on this coastal town. I just love those kinds of vibes. That's one of the reasons I moved to California, is because I just want these like magical ocean vibes. So our main character has kind of like an illness. She can't breathe very easily. She has a lot of problems with her skin, and her dad one day decide to move back to the coast where they had been living in the Midwest, and all of a sudden she can like breathe better and her skin's starting to heal, and you're trying to kind of figure out why. So I'm not going to tell you whether there's mermaids or not in this, but it's kind of alluded to throughout the whole book, so you get all of the things that you're wanting from Mermaid Marathon. It's a tiny bit on the slower side, but it was just so fun to read about, and I just loved being in this book, and I don't really see it recommended anywhere, so definitely recommend. Then we have Part of Your World by Liz Braswell. This is part of the Twisted Tale series, which I can confirm are standalones. Sometimes people say things are standalones, but then there's like little Easter eggs and things that connect. I have not found that so far with the series, and I read the first 3. This one's probably my second favorite. I didn't love the Aladdin one, but I really enjoyed the Sleeping Beauty one. This one is a complete retelling of The Little Mermaid, the movie from Disney. And this one, Ursula/Vanessa wins and like marries Prince Eric, and you're like a few years in the future, and Ariel's in charge of the underwater kingdom, and you're just following the story from there. This one has a lot of the Little Mermaid vibes that you're wanting, and I enjoyed that part of it, but it didn't quite give me exactly what I wanted. I felt like it was a little long. I felt like it was slow at parts. It's a little bit more about the politics than it is about like Eric and her, but we talk a lot about Vanessa in here, which is like Ursula when she's like in her human form, and that was really cool. So for true mermaid lovers, Little Mermaid lovers, I recommend, but not one of my favorites, unfortunately. Then we have Monstrous Beauty by Elizabeth Fama. This is one I'm constantly recommending. I actually read this one when I very first started getting back into reading, and I didn't like it because it was darker than I was expecting, because this one has some more gothic-y vibes to it, and I wasn't used to that. And then I decided to reread it a couple years later, and now it's one of my favorites, and I'm more used to like the darker reads. So definitely know that going in. This is young adult, but it's got some more like gothic, darker vibes about it, which I personally really loved. So in this one, you're following a mermaid named Sarinka who like abandons her mermaid life for love and like goes to live on the shore. This choice has consequences, and then years later, you're following this girl living in this coastal town who is somehow linked to this mermaid, and you're kind of uncovering this as the book goes on. There's so much more to it than that, but it's kind of good to go in slightly blind. There is a love story in here, there's a mystery in here, and those good darker vibes. And of course, a lovely cover. Next, we have The Mermaid by Christina Henry. I so enjoy Christina Henry. I read her Peter Pan retelling, which was kind of like a horror retelling. Loved it so much, and I loved this one as well. This one has such a unique spin on it. So you're following this mermaid named Amelia who decides to come live on land, and then you're also following P.T. Barnum who's trying to make this fortune, and when he discovers that there might be a mermaid, he sends his like lackey to go to this town and fetch her. And so you're getting a lot to do with like P.T. Barnum and a little bit of historical aspects in here. And this mermaid, it's so good. I think this one's considered adult, I'm not sure. It's very short. I loved it so much. I just had such a good time with it because it was so different. There's like a little love story in here. We've got a lot of historical aspects in here that were really, really interesting. And this is one of the more unique mermaid books that I've read. Next up is The Mermaid's Daughter, which again is one of my all-time favorites. I constantly want to reread this one. This is an adult mermaid standalone. So you're following Kathleen, who has been plagued since childhood with these strange like stabbing pains in her feet and weird sensations in her mouth and her tongue. She's been to teams of doctors, but only the touch of seawater is able to ease her pain. She is studying opera at a top conservatory and she's showing tremendous promise as a soprano. Her girlfriend is also a talented singer and worries that Kathleen is going to suffer the same fate as her mother and grandmother. When Kathleen has like a bad breakdown, she convinces her to go to her Irish birthplace to try and make sense of the legacy of her tragedy. So I'll leave you with that. It's so good. We talk a lot about opera and music in here, which again makes this super unique. And then she travels to Ireland and discovers all this myth and lore. It's so good. It's adult. The female-female romance is really sweet. And just the end of the book is so, so good. I love this one. And lastly, I want to talk about Mermaid Moon by Susan Kokel. This book is literally one of the prettiest books I own, and this is just the regular edition. Like, it is so beautiful. I bought it for that reason and that it was a mermaid book and I didn't know anything else. But this is a young adult mermaid novel and it's one of my very, very favorites. Very fairy tale-esque, very whimsical. So in here, our main character, Santa, is a mermaid and she finds out that her mother was born on land and had a spell cast on her to forget that she ever existed. So she goes on land to go and hunt for her mother and leaves the sea behind. We have this amazing coastal town. It's set more in like the 1600s. Those are the vibes that I'm kind of getting. We have a witch in here. There's a really obnoxious male character that's kind of like a prince. He's not really a prince, but he's like a lord or a duke, and he is hilarious. He's so funny. He kind of reminds me of the prince from Shrek, and he's just like, minions, do my work for me. Why is this not working out? And he's just hilarious. I remember thinking this was funny. This book's not like a comedy, but I remember really enjoying the humorous parts. But the parts with the witch and the mermaid and the town, and it is just so good, so magical, so much like a new fairy tale, and I highly recommend. Okay, you guys, so those are, I think, almost all of the Mermaid standalones that I have read that weren't like 2 stars or lower. I enjoyed so many of them. I have so many more to read on my TBR, but all of these will be great for Mermaid Marathon, whether you do them via audio or physically. I will link all the other mermaid recommendation videos down below in the description as well. I have a ton more. I will have more mermaid, pirate, ocean, island themed videos coming out over the next couple weeks before the readathon. Let me know if you've read any of these down below in the comments. Let me know which ones are your favorite. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at The Bright Side Girl. I'll be posting a lot on there as well, and I'll see you guys next time on The Bright Side.